Earlier this month, I sent a newsletter to my audience with the subject line, Ask Me a Question. Basically, I told everyone to jump into the comments section of the post and ask me any questions they have about the media industry or creator economy. Several of you did pipe in with some amazing questions. I then invited on Alexis Grant, the founder of They Got Acquired, to help me answer them. We answered questions on a range of topics like which media companies are succeeding with native advertising, the best ways for media outlets to run live events, how to grow your audience in a world where Google and Facebook are sending less and less traffic, and what a Substack advertising platform would look like. Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and this is The Business of Content, the show about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. To listen to an audio version of this show, subscribe to The Business of Content wherever you get your podcasts. This Q&A episode is actually part of an ongoing series. Every single month, I'll allow my subscribers to submit questions, and I'm going to do my very best to answer at least one question from every single subscriber. The only way to submit questions is by becoming a paid subscriber to my Substack newsletter. Subscribers also receive a Calendly link from me that allows them to book a half-hour introductory phone call. Many of my subscribers use it as an opportunity to tell me about their own media businesses and pick my brain on strategy. To subscribe, go to simonowens.substack.com. That's simonowens.substack.com. Or just Google the words Simon Owens and newsletter. Okay, let's jump into answering your questions. Hey, Alexis, thanks for joining us.
Hey, excited to see you again.
So this is kind of my part of my new monthly series where I send out a newsletter to my paid subscribers that basically says, ask me anything. And then those subscribers then jump into the comments section and ask me their burning questions about the media business, about content, how to get it to spread, how to monetize it better. And starting last month, I started having you on the show because one, you offered to come on, but two, you just have, a ton of experience and expertise in the media industry, not just in traditional media, but you've now, built several media startups and exited them. You created a social content agency and sold that. Then you were the editor-in-chief of The Penny Hoarder, which I think we might talk a little bit about today for one of our questions. That successfully sold a few years ago. You ran a website called The Right Life, which was geared towards freelance writers. You sold that a few years ago, and now you run something called They Got Acquired. What's the elevator pitch for They Got Acquired?
We help entrepreneurs sell their business.
Yeah. And so you've been running that site for a few years, so you're kind of still in the beginning stages of building that business. And because it's in a different niche, you're having to learn a lot of new things that you probably didn't really implement before. So it's kind of fun to text with you and kind of share our learnings and stuff like that. And also it's great to jump on calls like these so we can kind of think out loud with some of these things. So as I said, this is a Q&A type of episode. So we're basically going to go through the questions one by one and try to answer them as best as we can. Does that sound good?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, seeing the questions themselves is interesting because it's interesting to see like what other people are thinking about, and what... So that's just like a look inside of the minds of your audience.
Yeah, and several, like most of the people in my audience who are paying for my newsletter, they're like professional content creators themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So these aren't like creator 101 type questions. These are people who are already making a full-time living in the media space and asking kind of burning questions about things that they're thinking about, which I think is great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
So let's go through them. Let's start with the first one from Jennifer Reitman. Jennifer, she runs a women's magazine called Dame Magazine. I actually got to meet her the last time I was out in LA. She's been running that. I can't remember if it's a nonprofit or a for-profit, but she doesn't lock any content behind a paywall. I think she has some sort of membership program and also, sells advertising for the magazine as well. Her question is, off the top of your head, can you think of any content companies that have in-house agencies or brand content services that have emerged in the past few years? I'm certainly familiar with the old guard, the T-Brand Studios, which is, I think, the brand agency for the New York Times, or Guardian Labs, but looking to see how that model is evolving outside of selling in services to advertisers. In the podcast space, I've also seen a few brand services, but just curious who comes to mind for you that is doing a great job or even innovating in that space. Yeah, it seems like, 10 years ago, like every single media company was basic, because I think BuzzFeed kind of pioneered this whole the whole idea of the brand studios. Like, we have this secret sauce of creating great content, and we can actually sell those services to an advertiser. So rather than buying a boring display ad, hire us to create amazing content and put it in front of our audience. I'm sure like BuzzFeed didn't invent that, but they kind of perfected it. And when there was all this buzz around BuzzFeed, then suddenly every media company was launching some kind of content studio. You don't hear about them as much. I think it's because a lot of them realize that doesn't scale super well. It's actually really hard to create bespoke content. It's also super expensive for brands. There's not a lot of flexibility. They can't buy it at scale. Most of these agencies, brand agencies, still exist, but they haven't. You don't really hear like publishers talk them up that often anymore. But a lot of creators, like smaller media companies, they don't need to scale super large, so they actually can make pretty good margins by doing this type of content. So I'd be interested in hearing from you. Like, you worked at the Penny Hoarder, and I know that the Penny Hoarder, you worked on the editorial side, not the advertising side, but it was also a small company, so I'm sure you were familiar with how it works. And I profiled the Penny Hoarder several years ago, and I thought like their kind of their approach to like branded content was really smart. And just for some context, like Penny Hoarder, you did sponsored content, but it was like a performance marketing type of content, like because it was a very product focused and a very service focused website. You were able to actually like create really good content recommending products to your readership, and the deals that would be signed with your sponsors would like, yeah, they would pay some kind of upfront fee, but then there would be some kind of KPI, like a purchase or an email sign up, that you would get paid for as well. So the Penny Hoarder would get rewarded for whatever sales or other kind of KPIs they drove for the advertiser. Can you talk a little bit, like I thought was really interesting was the vetting process of how they chose sponsors.
Yeah, I mean, this was a few years ago now. I'm sure it's different there now, especially because the company has changed ownership several times since then. But I mean, you asked about vetting sponsors. I mean, really, the question was just like, is this going to be useful and helpful for our audience? Because if it's not going to perform well anyways. And if when you get paid on performance, you want it to be something that's truly useful to the audience. So it's a win for you and for the sponsor. And then we set it up the way I think a lot of brands do today, which is, we had a branded content team that would create that content because they had to think about it differently. There's like an extra layer on top of creating great content like you would in a normal editorial setting. You also then need to layer on some, client interactions, make sure you're meeting all of the like compliance type regulations that come up in those interactions. So we had a small team within editorial that was dedicated to that.
And from what I remember, how it worked is you would have inbound interest from advertisers, and then someone on that team would be assigned to actually spend a few weeks just like trying out the product and seeing like, could we legitimately recommend this to our audience? And that's why I think the advertising was so successful, is because these were actually like vetted advertisers that your brand content team actually could create, real endorsements for and really engaging content around, because they had vetted and rejected most of the inbound that had come in, right?
Yeah, exactly. And even some of the stories were first person. So someone would say they went through the process of signing up and what the perks were. And we also encouraged writers to be really upfront about what wasn't good in their experience, so that the reader felt like they got a holistic picture and they went into it with realistic expectations for what they'd be getting. Yeah, we found that was really effective.
And the way that the deals worked was like the brand would have to pay some kind of set fee, but there would be some kind of affiliate or performance deal in it as well, that like you were incentivized to create great content, because part of how much you made was ultimately driven by how many people actually clicked on the link and performed whatever task that person, or whatever that task that brand was looking for, whether it was like an email sign up or signing up for a credit card or, purchasing something.
Yeah, that's exactly right. How you just described it. I think it's good when you can align incentives so that because really it ended up meaning that we did have the best interest of the reader in mind, because in order for the sponsor to win, the reader had to win too.
Yeah. I mean, part of it is it depends on the niche. Like if you just don't have a niche that lends itself to those kinds of product recommendations, like you're kind of, it's more difficult to set up those kinds of deals.
Yeah, definitely. There was another thing I wanted to mention on this woman's question, which I thought was interesting, which is I think a lot of people, I guess we were kind of doing this back then too, but even now, if you think of like the newsletter businesses, a lot of those companies need to have someone in-house who's creating the sponsored content for the sponsor, to make it interesting and like have it have the voice of their newsletter to like make it feel like it really fits in well. So I think it's obviously increases the cost of having a sponsor if you have to create that creative for them, but knowing that it's going to be that much better and it will perform so much better, I think it makes sense to do that. So I've seen a lot of, especially thinking of newsletters here, a lot of the newsletters I think have people who are focused on that piece of the newsletter.
Yeah, and that's something, something that I've never really done for my newsletter is like I always allow the sponsors to submit their own copy. And I always say like I will give you feedback, and I have given feedback to some sponsors like I don't think this headline will draw people in, or I think you could change this, tweak this. But for the most part, I allow them to create their own content, and that's more just to free up more my time. But I do agree that if you can like obviously if you're a professional content creator and your own audience, you can always give like good advice or create really good content that will appeal to your audience. One thing that I've been seeing a lot of the more I talk to a lot of publishers is a lot of success on the B2B side, because B2B is different is in that the KPIs for the advertiser are much different. Like they're usually selling some kind of enterprise product where they just need to like the sponsorship will pay off for them even if they just convert one person into a customer. So they are more interested in kind of like these lead generation type sponsorship deals. And what's great about those is you can actually create content that's good enough, that's just as good as your editorial content, and you're just locking it behind some kind of email gate where the sponsor gets some exposure like of their brand, but the real kind of KPI that you're getting are these leads that you then turn over to the sponsor. And at the same time, even if like the sponsor is involved in the content, a lot of times like the audience doesn't care because this is actually still high quality content that they that they would find informative regardless if it had a sponsor or anything like that. Like you've been doing these research reports, and I think you've sort of been doing like originally you were selling them for like $200, but then you found like maybe the better model is to make them free and then find a sponsor. Like have you been doing that kind of dynamic?
Yeah. I was just thinking of two examples of things that we've been doing that kind of fit into what you're talking about. The first is we have what we call reports. So for example, it might be like we have one on 20 content businesses that sold. Originally we were making a very small free version and then a paid version. And we've moved towards making the entire report free. And actually we need to go back and do that for the content one, because I haven't done that for the content one yet. And I would like to do that. But what we found is, we can get a sponsor to sponsor it because they've gotten great leads from it. It's worked really well for the sponsors. It helps them target people who actually care about possibly selling their business or understanding how to value their business. But then it's also super valuable for the subscribers. And on top of that, we get new subscribers whenever we launch one. Like last year, that was our primary driver of new subscribers, was releasing reports, because people would download to get it and then we put them on our email list. But when we create that, though, it's really that piece of content is really, we create it and then we slap the sponsor on. It's not really collaborative with the sponsor. It doesn't need to be, because it's innately interesting, I think, to the audience without it. But we do work with other sponsors where we create content with them. So for example, sometimes we'll do we'll interview someone about their expertise. Like we recently interviewed an M&A lawyer who talked about like just things you should avoid when you're selling your business, mistakes you should avoid. And we talked through a lot of the tricky parts. And then we turned that interview, we put it onto a landing page, and we drove traffic to it using our newsletter. And that's more of something I think of where like, yeah, we worked with the sponsor to create a piece of content that was useful to our audience. But I got a bunch of emails from people who saw that and were like, thank you so much for doing this, because I had these questions and it was nice to hear directly from the source. Like they appreciated it as a standalone piece of helpful content. You know, it was useful to them. So I think that's really the metric, as always when you come back to these things, is like, can it really be actually helpful to your audience?
Yeah, and I think it is easier to make it helpful on the B2B side. For the report, so like it's like a PDF report, like a 50-page PDF report or something like that, right?
We do a PDF, but we also do a spreadsheet, so like a Google Sheet. So people can use whatever version they want.
So they land on this landing page and it's like, in order for you to receive this report, you first need to enter your email address, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So that's a way for you to collect email, like a great way to force people to give you their email address for you to build your own email list. And then like, what's the kind of sponsor that would sponsor that report?
A lot of our sponsors are M&A service professionals. So the M&A lawyer I mentioned, or like we work with a few different M&A brokerages. So like advisors who help people sell their business. That's the kind of sponsor that would want to be on there. People who want to reach founders who might eventually want to sell. And
so after, a certain amount of time, do you then take those email addresses and say, hey, these are your leads for the next next businesses you're going to work with?
We actually don't do that. Though I know that some people do that. And I think we could build a model where we do. But for this particular sponsorship, we just keep the emails ourselves. And then there's enough call outs of the sponsor within. Like we put the sponsor in the PDF, we put them in the spreadsheet, we put them in the email that goes out when someone downloads the report, and we put them in the newsletter that goes to our full list that announces the new report. So they get lots of exposure points to the audience, and we find that through that, enough people will go over and like they'll click over to their site and send an inquiry. And that has turned into enough leads to make it worth it for the sponsor. And
is it like based on principle that you don't do the handover of because all this can be disclosed, of course, when they're entering their email address. Like, is it like you don't want to hand that over, or the type of sponsors you get wouldn't really like those wouldn't be high value? Those email addresses wouldn't be like high value leads that they could really use or something like that.
I think you can make a case for doing it either way. I think if you give the emails, like the price point would have to be far higher. I mean, we charge about $10,000 for each report, but I think if you're giving people hundreds of emails that are, and each, as you've said, like our sponsors, most of them are ones where, hey, they get a couple of clients, maybe even one client, and it's worth the sponsorship for them. So they'd have to pay me way more if they wanted to get all the emails that we got. But I do think like some people who are downloading the reports are just curious to look around, and they're not ready to sell their business at that moment. So like requiring that second level of opt-in is also a natural way to vet like who's actually interested in potentially working with a service provider.
Yeah. Yeah, I've talked to some who charge upwards of like $30,000 per webinar or whatever that they're doing. Yeah, you're right that like you can charge a pretty high premium for that.
Also, like, I mean, as an example, I know people do that all the time, and I do think you can do it and it can work. But like, I attended a webinar recently. I signed up for it, and it was that kind of deal where they shared my email with the sponsor. And I got so many emails after that from the sponsor, and I really didn't care about it. And it kind of annoyed me that I'm like now on this person's list. I can't seem to get off of it. So I think like prioritizing the user experience is so important, and sometimes that gets lost.
Yeah, that's where the Gmail filters come into handy for me. It's just like half the time I don't even bother unsubscribing to a list. I'll just create a Gmail filter where any email from that domain. So if it's like Coca-Cola.com, any email address that has that domain in the email address will like automatically go to my like trash filter. So yeah, I'm pretty decent about filtering that stuff out. But yeah, I'm definitely kind of hesitant for the same reason. Like, when you hit like an article on a news website, it's like, before you read this article, you have to sign up for an account. It's like, I just want to read this one article. I don't want to like sign up for you to spam me. Like, I don't even have a relationship with this publication yet, and they're like forcing me to like opt into their like email marketing in order just to like read one article, which I definitely bristle against.
I feel the same way about opt-ins, and but that's what we're doing with the reports. I find it really depends on how you do it and what you're offering, because most opt-in ideas I come up with, like things that would have worked 10 years ago, I just think, you know what, that's not really compelling enough today. It wouldn't work, or like nobody wants another PDF or whatever. But I think if you can come up with something that no one else is doing, like no one else is compiling reports of businesses that sold for 6, 7, or 8 figures, like it just doesn't exist. So I think if you can create something like that's truly that valuable to people, maybe they won't pay for it, but maybe you can give it away as an opt-in and then make money another way. Yeah.
And plus, I guess the devil's advocate argument is like, they're getting this content for free. You have to pay for it. You have to pay for the creation of that content somehow. Yeah. So, the price of turning over an email address is relatively low.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. So let's move on to the next question. What are some creative ways, this is from Sam Kraft. What are some creative ways you're seeing news publishers leverage live events, both as part of a monetization strategy and to drive brand awareness and audience growth? So you attend, I think, more, you're more into attending live events than I am. Like, I almost never like pay for tickets. I almost only go to live events where I'm invited as a speaker, and usually only if they're paying for my travel and hotel. Like, what are some things that you look at, or like, have there been any events you've gone to that you thought were really innovative, or have done like cool, interesting things that are kind of outside the box or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I only started going back to events last year, but I did go to a few that I really liked last year. And this question was really exciting to me because I think there's a huge opportunity for events right now. And like some examples that were the ones that, some of the conferences I went to last year that I hadn't known about previously are like niche topics. So there's smaller conferences. And my own personal belief is that people are sick of these huge, massive conferences where lots of people are there. And like, we go to these things because we want to connect to other people who are in our industry, not because we want to watch a lot of speakers on stage. I think that approach, though, kind of goes against the way that a lot of conference owners make money, which is they want to have a sponsor on the stage, right? So to do that, you need to have a lot of people in the room. So I think you have to get really creative about how you run them. But like, for example, Jacob Donnelly's AMO last year, Ask a Media Operator, he writes on many of the same topics that you do, but I think you guys both take totally different approaches to it. But his conference was fantastic. It was a niche conference. I think there was a couple hundred people there. It was in New York. It was just one day. I think he made a lot of money off it because tickets were like $1,000 for the day. But to me, that was worth it because I got to meet all these people in my space who I'd either followed online or maybe I knew them, but I never met them in person. It was like a gathering of the minds. And there's both at his conference and more so at some of the other ones I went to, there's a lot of built-in, I hate to call it networking, but networking time.
Well, I'm noticing
you get to talk to people.
I'm noticing more like, speaking of other people who operate in a similar niche, Brian Morrissey, he's been organizing these dinners. So it's very intimate. It's just a dinner. I think like who sponsors stuff, Brian Sager and his partner, they've been teaming up with Dan Ochinsky and just like doing these city dinners where I'm guessing there's no more than 20 people there, but because these sponsors are willing to pay because these are like, high level media executives that are like more likely to, buy their products. So like these kind of like small, more intimate events, they don't scale super well, but if you can like, especially if you live in like a major metro area, that's where there's like a lot of people concentrated in that industry, like in that city, then, you could probably get some headway in terms of.
I mean, you've done some of those too, right?
Yeah, I mean,
you've done dinners. I wasn't thinking of the small dinners when we were answering this question, but you're totally right. It's like even the dinners you've done, those have been great for I think brand awareness and just getting to know other people in the space and seeing them, in a place where I live.
Yeah, and I'm trying to do one of those per quarter, but I'm not. A lot of people think I'm an idiot because I don't really monetize them. They're just strictly networking things for me to like get out and meet people. Although most of the people who do come are my paid subscribers. One conference I think does it really interesting that we've both been to, and I think we're both speaking at it in May, is CEX, the Content Entrepreneur Exchange. It's run by this guy named Joe Polizzi.
Expo. It's content entrepreneurs.
Expo. Okay, I just know it as CEX. I think it's like really clever. So they keep it capped. I think it's like a maximum of like 400 people. And I've never been to a conference where they did so much to encourage networking. Whereas like it's, most conferences, they'll maybe have like one networking thing at the end of each day, like a happy hour or something like that. But like he has like built-in networking sessions like throughout the day where it's in like this central location where it's like a cafeteria type place. And there are, there's like food and coffee. So like he'll have like a session or two and then a networking session, then a session or two and a networking session. And then he put all his sponsors in that same room too. So so not only is he encouraging people to just go out and meet new people and like having lots of time set aside for the networking, but the sponsors are in the same space as the networking space. So there's like a little bit of, additional value and synergy there.
Yeah, I remember last year at that conference, I was waiting in line for food and I was just talking to the person next to me and she happened to work for one of the sponsor booths. And I ended up, I don't think I ended up engaging them at the end, but I did a couple of calls with them to try and understand if we could use their services. So, and that was the perfect example, is like, she wasn't hard selling me at all. It was just like, we're standing next to each other, we get to know each other. And I'm like, oh, I could actually use what your company is here promoting, I think that's really a good way to do it. There's one other example I could share, which is a conference that I think's been going on for the last 10 years, but I just found out about last year. It's called Rhodium, RHODIUM. And it's for people who run online businesses specifically. I think there's a threshold to enter of like a certain revenue threshold, or you have to have sold a business for a certain amount or something. But it's vetted. So like to get into the group, you have to apply and even do maybe like a 15-minute call or something like that with the founder. And then once you're in the group, you can be invited to the conference. And then beyond that, so I went to the conference last year in October and I loved it. I felt like it was one of the first times where I was in an event that was like all people like me. Like I had so many things I wanted to talk to these people about. But then as a second step, the founder has a retreat like that's coming up, in this spring, which I'm going to go to. And that's just like, I think it's 30 or 40 people from the larger group. So he's even niched it down to like, oh, these people want to spend more informal time together. And there's no speakers. It's not like a really structured event. It's like you go, there's some activities you do together and you can talk business in between. And like that appeals to me. Like those are the things that I want to be learning from. So I think that's a really cool business model. That is his business. Like he's running that community and those events now as his business. But I think there's so many cool ways that we can take advantage of. Like all of us are hungry now for in-person interaction and like intimate connections. We want to talk to people, not just like look at a stage. And another cool thing to mention here is, events are pretty hot in the M&A space too. Like bios want to buy events because they've come back hot after the pandemic. So it's a great, and on top of that, it's really dovetails well with media businesses. So a lot of people listening to this, I think there's an opportunity for adding events as another line item for revenue.
Am I misremembering? Are you part of Sampar's Hampton?
I am, yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
And isn't he do it like, so that he charges like $8,000 a year and you have to apply to get into it. And part of that is like local meetups or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they have a very strong online community, and it's really high. Like the threshold for getting in is quite high. I think you have to have over $1 million in revenue a year, or have had some sort of exit or something like that. But their online community is really strong. Like their Slack community is. I try to go there instead of browsing the web when I want to like take a break from work, because just reading other people's questions, you learn a lot about how people are solving problems in their businesses. But what they've done with events is they have online events, because it's a big group. I don't know how many people they have in there now, but it's at least hundreds of people, if not over 1,000. And they do lots of online virtual events where like people are talking about a specific industry topic, or they bring in like a guest speaker, and then they also have in-person events. But what I find for the in-person events is like, I live in a rural area. I'm outside of DC, and it's real pain for me to get to DC on a weekday. So I actually haven't been to any of their in-person events. They do it locally at different cities, but they also have like retreats in different places throughout the year. But yeah, that's another great example of, I consider that more of a community company, but it has a strong event aspect to it.
Yeah. I think like the gold standard for events is TED. I know this is kind of a boring answer since it's so obvious, but like the way that TED has been able to create free content out of its events that like goes super viral, which, you know, they can monetize the content, but then also they create a sense of FOMO so that they're able to charge. I forget what it costs to go to the main TED conference, but even though that content is going to be released for free, like there's so much FOMO that people will pay so much money just to be in the same room as like these like high profile speakers. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like FOMO is an essential ingredient to any event. So it's, yeah, you have to have a brand that people respect, but also like want to be part of, you know?
Okay, next question's from Tegan Goddard. He is, for people who don't know, he's one of the OG political bloggers, has like a super popular political blog called Political Wire. His question is, with social media and SEO much less reliable for driving traffic and acquiring new readers these days, what are the best and most creative ways that you're seeing for creators to grow their audience? Actually, I don't know if you saw my newsletter that I sent out yesterday, but it was titled Meta's Just Not That Into You. And it was all about how Meta has completely pivoted away from news and allowing people to share political news and other types of content. Meanwhile, Twitter used to be the biggest like, you know, place for journalists to hang out. It's kind of imploded, and Elon has like de-emphasized links within it. Obviously, like YouTube and TikTok and Instagram were never optimized for sending traffic to your website. And then LinkedIn has been leaning into news and content, and, you know, proudly promoting, you know, content creators, or that, you know, and some people have seen a lot of success with driving traffic. But then of course, if you don't operate in a B2B niche, like you're kind of shit out of luck with that. So what was kind of your initial thoughts upon reading this question about how in an era when platforms are sending, and even Google, like obviously Google has always been a huge traffic driver, but now it's trying to experiment with generative AI so that it can answer questions directly in the search results so people don't have to click. So like, what are your thoughts on how publishers can adapt to this kind of post-platform era?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's much harder than it used to be. I wrote a post on LinkedIn about that this week. Like, it's not just you, it's way harder. In terms of social networks, I think for B2B, LinkedIn is really, not only is it already delivering, but I think it's continuing on an upward climb. Personally, I love the space there now for discovering people and connecting with people. It feels to me like similar to like what Twitter used to be. And it sends leads and drives signups. But I don't think that there's one like great way to generate traffic anymore. You know, it used to be that there was a few different ways that were almost like the secret, and I just don't think that exists anymore. I think you have to do all the little things and try a lot of little things, and then when you find one that seems like it's going to work, then dig hard into that and keep going with it. But I think it's much harder than it used to be.
Hey, I just want to interrupt the programming for just a moment to note that you are at the halfway point of the video. If you made it this far, then that's probably a sign that you like this sort of content. So maybe just take a second to subscribe to the channel below. If you're feeling especially generous, you can hit the like button. Okay, back to the show. Yeah. So in my newsletter yesterday, I took kind of a contrarian approach in saying that like the era when platforms were sending tons of traffic actually distorted incentives in the media industry and cause us to chase traffic for traffic's sake and not focus on like what differentiates us as content creators. Like what can we offer that's truly unique? And so I kind of advocated for kind of like a slow growth approach to media building. Whereas you're no longer chasing any kind of virality or huge like hordes of people visiting your site all at once, that the focus should instead be on just like obviously optimize all your channels so that you can grow your audience, but at the same time don't make that your North Star. Just focus on like building like a high quality audience that is showing up, time after time after time, that's consuming your content consistently through like newsletters or visiting the homepage or downloading a podcast and stuff like that. So I guess like my kind of contrarian view is just don't worry about it that much. I don't know. What are your kind of thoughts on that?
Well, just you talking about it then made me think like, I think a better question to ask is like, where can you build where you don't need a massive audience for it to be successful? Because it's really hard now to build a massive audience. It's still possible, but it's hard. So what can you build that doesn't rely on that to succeed? Right. And I mean, it is really, I think niche media is having a moment right now, especially niche B2B. And partly for this reason, right? Because a lot of those publishers are still doing well when everyone else is struggling a bit. So I would turn it on that question on its head a little bit and say, yeah, well, do you really need a massive audience? And like, where can you succeed that without driving a ton of like where that trickle and the slow growth is actually going to be what you need?
Yeah. And I think like a lot of creators, me included, maybe probably you, I think our audiences are already large enough. Like I think if my audience size today, I have like 14,000 subscribers to my newsletter and a few thousand listeners to my podcast, like the net worth and the power and the value of that audience that I already have is really great. Like my focus right now is like, how do I unlock that value? And I think that's your struggle as well. It's like, you understand that you have like, I think you have a few thousand newsletter subscribers as well. Like there's probably like some incredibly successful business owners on your list right now, and there's so much value locked up on that. It's just like, how do we tweak our product so that we actually get more value out of our already existing audience, versus like, I don't think my business is going to be that much better if I scale to 28, like, double my audience size, if I don't just get better at like just monetizing the audience that I already have.
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, scale matters if you're relying on a sponsorship model, because the more people you have, the more you can charge a sponsor. And especially if you're in like a B2C, you need a lot of people to charge good advertising rates. But if you can get away from purely relying on sponsorships and have, like you said, basically increase your LTV, right? How much money can you make from each subscriber? I'd be so curious. We don't have to necessarily talk about it on this call, but I'd love to at some point like roll on if there are any like high price point offers that you've considered rolling out to your audience. Because like you were talking about like having a set of those dinners, and even though you didn't get a sponsor for those dinners, like I'm one of those people who I'm like, I'll buy anything Simon puts out there. And I'm sure there's lots of people who are listening to this who'd say that too. Like what else have you thought about giving your audience that's like higher value than paying for a subscription? It's hard though. It's really hard to come up with that offer that resonates and feels good.
Yeah, like the one time I've done it, I did like I teamed up with the University of Oregon, and we did like a course. I can't remember. I can't remember if you were one of the speakers for that course or not.
I think so. Yeah, I thought that was really cool. You did that.
Yeah, so we charged like $1,000 a person, and that was probably I think we sold like 20 seats, so I think it generated something like $20,000 for that like relatively short course. That's probably my only experience actually selling something that was a little bit on the pricier side. I think it just takes a lot of confidence, and it's like such a huge investment. It's something that I've always wanted to do, but like right now I'm just so focused on how do I crack the code to get people to pay for $100 a year subscription or whatever. Like until I can like completely figure out, feel good that I finally like completely crack that code. I don't know, I'm just one person, so like I can only spread myself out so much. And like the thing with like online event or live events and stuff like that, even that, I just would not feel confident in my ability to organize all of that by myself. Like I would need some kind of partner or something, because it's just such a huge daunting task to take on.
Yeah. I think you hit on it when you said, like, especially if you're a small business, when you add these different revenue streams, they add complexity to the business and it makes it a lot more work. And sometimes that's contrary to like the simplicity that many of us crave. That's why we're running something like this, like to have flexibility and autonomy and not work all the time.
I mean, I guess you could argue that ads are a high price product. It's just it's selling to a different constituency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
So I guess that's the other like high priced ad product that I sell.
Yeah. Well, I'd be curious from your audience what they want from you. That's high priced, maybe.
Yeah, something.
You can ask them.
So yeah, maybe I should like just do some more kind of open campfire talks about what people would actually get value from and what would they be willing to pay for. But I've talked to a lot of media entrepreneurs who they say don't even trust what your audience tells you, because it's so easy for you to fill out a survey or something like that and say, I would pay for XYZ, but then when they actually sell those things, nobody wants to pay for it.
That's totally true. Yeah. And you never know until you actually try to sell it.
Let's see. Okay, let's go to the next question. Next question is from David Ramos. I'm curious your take on alternative platforms for audience growth. And he gives some examples like Lemmy instead of Redix, X Alternatives, Dispo. Do you think these have the momentum needed to be influential? Are there any small platforms you are bullish on? I hadn't even heard of some of those platforms he mentions. I don't know. I guess to kind of just throw off some of my initial responses is I have like created accounts on certain social networks, especially when like Twitter was first imploding and there were all these like Twitter competitors that were popping up very quickly. I don't know, like I'm kind of over giving my free time to platforms that can't give me something in return. So like I spend the most of my time each week creating like exclusive content for my newsletter and for my podcast. And then all my remaining time creating short form content, I'm basically copying and pasting the same short form content across multiple platforms. And so like what you see in my Facebook group, you'll also see on Substack notes, you'll also see on Threads, and you'll also see on LinkedIn, and you'll also see on Blue Sky. It's basically the same message that's scheduled out across all those different platforms. And out of all of those, the platforms that I might give some kind of additional content creation time to, right now, I'm spending the most time on Threads because it's kind of like my Twitter replacement, where if I just have some kind of random thought that pops in my head or some kind of observation that isn't worth writing an entire newsletter around, like a lot of times I will post that to Threads. And that, out of all of them has like one of the larger user bases. It now has over like 100 million daily active users or monthly active users or something like that. I don't know. I'm generally of the idea that it's just not worth your time unless there's some like strong value that it can send to your owned and operated things. What do you think?
Same. I mean, maybe that's partly just my own personal. Is like I can't be bothered anymore. I just don't want to spend my time doing that. I think niche communities is a good place to spend time. I would go there over a new social network personally,
like a Slack or Discord community or something like that.
Even if it's like joining a community, like we talked about some of the communities that we're in, like joining a community because it gives me a chance. It's not like I'm hard selling our stuff in there, but get to know people, and sometimes there's an opportunity to solve a problem that they're having with what we offer. I would do that in a heartbeat over joining another social network. In fact, I used to run a Twitter course like 10 years ago, and I barely use Twitter now because it's just not worth it to me anymore. And I'm on pretty much zero social networks except for LinkedIn. I use Facebook and Instagram for personal stuff only. But LinkedIn is the only one I feel like that's remaining that has any value for me.
Yeah, you used to, like a year or two ago, you used to post a lot of Twitter threads and stuff like that. And now
I used to cross post in both places, but I realized it's better off like writing for LinkedIn and not even bothering to create a cross post for Twitter.
yeah, you write a lot of content for LinkedIn that's like native to LinkedIn.
Yeah, it's like my journal place right now. I like to share there. I try to use it again in the They Got Acquired newsletter, because I do like a behind the business section and Tuesday newsletters. So I often will reuse something I wrote from LinkedIn on there. But yeah,
A lot of the stuff I see you posting on LinkedIn is like you kind of thinking out loud, I think,
exactly.
about your business life.
It's more benefit to me than anyone else.
Yeah. Yeah. And then a lot of people will chime in and kind of like give their own thoughts and stuff like that. Yeah. I kind of think of like social media now. I used to think of social media as like the value was driving traffic back to my website or whatever, or my articles. But now I get so little traffic from social media. Like most of my traffic that's coming from outside, my actual core subscribers is direct traffic, which I think that's people like forwarding my, they read like a really insightful newsletter or something like that, and they'll like share it in their Slack channel or text it or email it and stuff like that. That's like considered dark social. So direct traffic and then Google traffic are like my two main traffic drivers. Twitter used to be a pretty decent traffic driver, but I'm pretty much completely off Twitter now. And I get a lot of impressions on LinkedIn, but not a lot of like clicks back to my site. So I kind of think of like social media as just like a way to have just more touch points with my audience, so they see my name and my face and my thoughts showing up in their feeds more often in between me sending out newsletters or podcasts or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which sounds like that's how you're using LinkedIn to a certain extent.
Yeah, definitely. I like it for the connections. I find there's really high quality connections. I do think it drives some email signups too, but yeah, I like it for the connections to high quality people who may then share something, or having that relationship is beneficial in some way.
Okay, next question is from Louis Woodall. What new spins on the News Roundup Digest newsletter model have you encountered in recent months? I feel the straightforward, here's 10 things that happened this week model has been done to death, and would be interested to learn what innovative iterations on this are doing the rounds. Do you for They Got Acquired, do you do like news roundups of others, like do you link to other stuff that's happening in the field or anything like that?
No. I've done this in like other previous companies like years ago. But we don't do anything like that. It's a good question though. Thanks for asking me that, because it makes me think about it. But I feel like I think there's some value in it, but it takes a lot of work. We do occasionally, like if there's something super interesting happening in the industry, I'll include it in the newsletter, but we don't have a section where I feel like, oh, I have to fill this out every week. But I try to keep the newsletter as low lift as possible so that it actually happens.
I think like the quick news roundup is like, I've been doing this for years. It's like a great way to just give people an additional reason to open your newsletter, even if the topic of that week's newsletter isn't really interesting to them. Mm-hmm. Like let's say you're writing about some kind of topic that some person, they might be interested in a lot of stuff you write about, but they're not interested in that specific week's topic or something. They might still open your newsletter because they're like, well, even if I'm not interested in that main topic they're covering, I enjoy the link roundup that they have that has other industry news. And so It gives that extra incentive. One thing I've been experimenting recently, so Substack allows you to send out a newsletter that's truncated. So you can send out the full newsletter to your paid subscribers, but then you can send out a truncated version where you choose where the paywall kicks in. So like I'll send out a paid newsletter, but I'll make the first 400 words free and then send that out to the free subscribers. So once they reach that end, it says if you want to continue reading, you have to become a paid subscriber. And a lot of Substack writers now do this, and they say it's great for converting, but the worry that you might have is that you're just going to piss off your free readers who aren't ready to actually convert into paid subscribers. And then if you send out too many of these, then they might just stop opening your newsletter altogether, because they're going to start thinking they're going to stop opening it, or they're going to unsubscribe because they're going to be like, well, he's just sending paid newsletters that I can't read anyway, and I'm not willing to subscribe. So what I've started doing is I've started putting the quick hits part, the news roundup, at the top of those newsletters. So they still, like, if they open it, even if they can't read the main essay, they still have this like kind of link roundup. So they're still getting value out of the newsletter, even if they have no intention into converting into paid. So I think that's one interesting way you can utilize that in a paid newsletter, at least.
Yeah, I like that. I've noticed some people using this format for like sponsored links, which I think is interesting.
Like the Published Press, and like Josh Spector does it too. Where it'll be like a link roundup, and it'll be like some of the links in the link roundup are like sponsored messages.
Yeah, I mean, I feel strongly that they should be identified when
a lot of them will put like
but...
a little asterisk or something like that to at least indicate.
Yeah.
But yeah, it definitely is sort of like tricking you into reading the entire message, not knowing it's sponsored or something like that.
Yeah.
You spoke to like you don't have the time. Like one thing that I've done is like most of the stuff that's in my quick hits are just repurposed social media posts. So I'm like getting double value out of it. So I'm like scheduling out social media posts throughout the day that are just kind of rounding up industry news, and then I'm just able to take all that stuff and just pull it into the newsletter, and that's my quick hits section. So that's one way where it's not like, taking up that much extra time, and you're getting like double value out of it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think anything that you share on social should be try to reuse it in some way somewhere else, because too often, like, I think we're putting things like one time here and one time there, and really only a tiny percentage of your audience sees it.
So the next question comes from Charlie Meyerson. As Memberful gets ready to impose a fee hike at the end of this month, I'm considering alternatives to accommodate readers who support Chicago Public Square. That's a local Chicago newsletter that he runs. What guidance, if any, might you have? So I don't think either of us have any experience with Memberful, so we can't speak to that specificity of like, comparing that platform to any others. I guess one thing that I would like to use the opportunity to talk about, and maybe you can also provide some thoughts on this, is I think like people get way too fixated on the price of some of these like SaaS platforms versus what the actual, instead of thinking of like, what are the actual features that I need as a creator? So they'll pick one platform or the other because this platform only takes 5% of my revenue, or this platform only takes 10%. You see this like fixation with Substack a lot because creators will be like, oh, why would you give 10% to Substack when you could go over to ConvertKit and you would just pay some flat fee and it would be far less than 10% of your income? Why are you giving this much to Substack? And it's just like my view is you're becoming too fixated on the amount you're paying and not whether that platform is actually giving you the value. And you talk to like some of these Substack writers who actually started out their newsletters pre-Substack, who's like maybe started, like a good example is Richard Rushfield, who runs this successful company called The Ankler. It's now generating, I think they've revealed that they're now generating over $10 million a year. So it's like a really successful company. They're still on Substack, and he started out on MailChimp using Stripe. And I interviewed him for my podcast, and he was like, to me, instantly Substack was worth it because I didn't have to spend 10 hours each week doing customer service. Like everything was just like easy and intuitive to use. And some people might not realize this, Substack actually has a customer service like ticketing system. So in the very few instances where one of my subscribers have had a problem, I've been able to forward their request to support@substack.com, and they've been able to address the question. Also, Substack is now like built in so much more functionality that helps you grow your audience through its like network effects, through its recommendation platforms. Anyway, I'm not saying this to like,
they should be a sponsor.
Yeah,
because you're being honest, but they should be a sponsor.
Yeah. So I'm not doing this to like tout the horn of Substack. Like I honestly don't care what platform people use. The point I'm trying to make though is that sometimes it's not the fee, it's the features. And you really and if you're really happy, Charlie, with Memberful, if you think that they're and I've talked to Charlie about his use of Memberful, and he seems to be happy, or was happy as of a few months ago, with how it handled, everything regarding his subscriptions. I guess my question is the price hike, enough of a driver for him to move on to another platform? Okay, I've spoken a lot. I think do you still use ConvertKit for your stuff?
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, like, what are your thoughts on, like, features versus price?
Well, I'm one of those people who's like, why would you use Substack and give them 10%?
Totally fair.
But I understand where you're coming from, and like it's a different value set, right? I also like to have complete autonomy. Like if I'm paying for a platform, it drives me nuts if there's things I couldn't do with it. I want to have like a platform that's so flexible, and maybe it's harder for me to set things up because of that, but that I can do it exactly the way I want.
Yeah. That's why Substack isn't for you. It's like
Exactly.
you love.
That is about features too. It's not about the cost. It's about features.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Like you like rolling up your sleeves and like really customizing whatever you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. But I mean, they have a lot more features, like you said, than they did years ago. So I think it's a stronger contender now because of that. But again, everything we're saying here is about the features. But I haven't heard anyone talk about any other tools for memberships other than Memberful. I don't run a community, but I think so. Jay Klaus runs a course on how to run Is it Jay Klaus? How to run communities. And he has some other suggestions for other tools, so maybe he's a good person to check out if you want to see what he recommends. I think he recommends them right on his homepage of his website. But I think my impression is that Memberful is kind of the front runner in that, but there's going to be lots more popping up because it's becoming so much more people are wanting to run communities that there's going to be more options.
Yeah. I should offer a quick disclosure that Memberful is like, has sponsored me a few times, but, yeah, like it seems like Memberful is like really good for smaller publishers, in terms of,
they make it easy.
Yeah.
Like you said.
Yeah. If you have your own domain. Especially.
But certainly I would think about, I mean, this happens all the time, right? Whenever you have any SaaS and they increase the price, it's like, oh my God, is it going to be worth that again? And for small creators, keep your expenses low is the most important like part, right? It's like you want to be able to take home as much money as you can. But I still think like an easier way is like, how can I make more money in this business? Can I charge people more? Can I offer something that's a higher price point and make more money that way so that the fee hike is not an issue for you?
Okay, one last question. And you're not going to be able to answer this at all, so I'll riff a little bit, and I have some like thought experiments to go through. This question's from Kevin Denny. I think that's how you pronounce the name. What's new with Substack's experimental ad network? Who gets to take part? Is this something that's going to be permanent for authors? So let me just give some context here. A month or two ago, a really successful Substack author named Jesse Singal was writing an article about a topic that involves Substack, and as part of his disclosure, so him like just kind of disclosing what his conflicts of interest were, he revealed that Substack was doing some kind of experimental ad platform that he was taking part of. I was one of the first people who noticed this disclosure, and so I highlighted it in my newsletter, and I think from there it just started spreading, like Axios covered it and stuff like that. But there's been like not a lot of details on like what this is. The way that he described it, Jesse described it, is that Substack was just basically just acting as like an advertising agency and was just helping him source like advertisers, which doesn't seem like something that would be very scalable or something that Substack would want to get into. I guess since we don't really know any other details besides that, like we could talk through some hypothetical ideas for what a platform like Substack or Beehive or some of these other or ConvertKit could create that would actually provide value to newsletters. And so like some of my initial ideas off the top of my head is like creating some kind of self-service, self-booking newsletter ad buying platform seems like would be effective. Like let's say, I have my newsletter. I could like create my own schedule of when there are ad slots available. I could set the price so that, they could just upload their credit card to Stripe or whatever and pay. I could set the parameters for how long the headline will be, what the size of the image can be, how much text can be in there, how many like URLs or calls to action can be in there, and creating like basically a marketplace, a self-service marketplace for newsletters. Like I feel like that would be really valuable. What do you think?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that someone like Substack could bring that's most helpful is the scale. So, like, say you only have whatever 20,000 email subscribers, and there's a big brands that want to advertise, but it's not worth it to them unless they're paying big bucks to do it. They could aggregate a whole bunch of, or bring together a bunch of newsletter owners and spread that spend out across the newsletters so that it can be spent and the advertiser still gets what they need. I think that'd be interesting. ConvertKit actually has something like this already, not like what I just described, but they have an ad network. And I don't know that much about it, but I think they rolled it out like 2 years ago. And I remember
it's like a newsletter lead generation network, right?
No, well, they have that too, but they also have an ad network, like for sponsors, where you can, if you have a certain number of subscribers, and I want to say, I think it's definitely more than, we have 7,000 subscribers, and I know that wasn't even close to enough when I looked at it. So I don't know the threshold, but you have to have a lot of subscribers, and then they'll sell for you. And they take a percentage of the cut. So I know my husband, Ben, he runs a newsletter. He has about 60,000 subscribers, and he was looking at would it make sense to do that for his, just to make it really easy, because he's a one-man show. He doesn't want to be, he does do sponsors now, and he has his VA helping him with it, but they sell them for you. It's all systematized. Of course, if you go through a network like that, I don't know how much you'd be setting your own ad rates. You certainly aren't. They're paying on a CPC basis. And for like a lot of B2B newsletters, you can charge a lot more than like the average rate, depending on the value of your audience.
I mean, it seems like in any kind of marketplace, you should be able to set your rate, whether it's CPC or some kind of flat rate. I'm always in favor of the flat rate just because it's just very simple. Mm-hmm. So it's presumably in this hypothetical Substack ad marketplace network is I could set all those parameters myself, and just do it from there. And seems like there would be a market need for this. I don't know. Like there was a company called Swapstack a few years ago. I don't know if you ever interacted with them.
Yeah, they sold. We wrote a post about them selling.
Yeah. I signed up for them, and there was another competitor to them. I forget what it's called. I should know this because I think their competitor was a sponsor of mine at some point. But yeah, it was kind of like this marketplace for newsletter ads where you could like you as a newsletter creator could create a profile that had all these various stats of your list size, how much you charge, and stuff like that. In all my years on those, they never sent me a single like actual good lead. So
yeah, it's hard. There's so many nuances and complications to doing it well for small creators.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, those were all the questions that were submitted for this month. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. Alexis, where can people find you online?
Look for me on LinkedIn. Alexis Grant on LinkedIn, even though I go by Lexi.
And also theyGotAcquired.com, right?
Yes, exactly. Our newsletter is theyGotAcquired.com/newsletter.
Awesome. Well, it's a lot of fun. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks. It was fun.